I'm Alan, 34, and I work as a freelancer. My girlfriend Chloe, 32, is an administrator at a business center. Life in the city was fast-paced for both of us, especially for Chloe. Lately, she'd been completely swamped at work between meetings, phone calls, and managing clients. It felt like we were losing touch. We hadn't had a proper break in months, so we finally decided to take some time off and go on a vacation, a much-needed trip to the sea. I could feel the tension lifting the moment we arrived at the resort. The sun, the sea, the warm breeze, it was everything I had imagined. Days were spent surfing, exploring, and soaking in the beauty of the coast. The salty air and crashing waves worked wonders, reminding me of the simple joy in just being present. And at night, that's when things really got wild. We'd let loose, hitting up clubs and bars, feeling that electric spark between us reignite. Every evening, we danced, drank, laughed, and by the time we were back in our hotel room, it was as if we couldn't get enough of each other. It was intense, passionate, raw, just how it used to be. I thought everything was perfect, but life has a funny way of kicking you down just when you think you've got it all. One evening, after an especially long day of surfing, I wasn't feeling great. Whether it was the heat, the drinks, or just exhaustion catching up to me, I told Chloe I wasn't up for going out. She seemed disappointed, but said she'd head down to the bar for a drink and bring one back for me. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "Yeah, just need some rest. I'll be good by morning," I reassured her, forcing a smile as I sank into the bed. She kissed my forehead, grabbed her purse, and with a soft, "I won't be long," she left. The door clicked shut behind her, and I closed my eyes, trying to shake off the discomfort. The sound of the waves outside became a lullaby, pulling me into a half-sleep. But sometime in the night, something stirred me awake, soft noises, muffled at first, but unmistakable. I thought Chloe had returned, maybe stumbling around in the dark. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand, but when the room lit up, I saw it was empty. The sounds continued, though faint but persistent, and then I realized they weren't coming from our room. They were coming from the room next door. At first, I chuckled to myself, figuring the neighbors were just enjoying their night a bit more enthusiastically than I was. But then, my body tensed. The moans, the voice, it wasn't just anyone. It was Chloe's. I know her voice too well to mistake it for someone else's. My heart started racing, and I sat up in bed, frozen in disbelief. Every fiber of my being wanted to deny what I was hearing, but I couldn't. And then, as if to confirm the nightmare, I heard a man's voice, deep and loud, echoing through the thin walls. "Chloe!" The name bounced around in my head like a slap. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I bolted out of bed, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would rip through my chest. My thoughts were a blur, disbelief mixing with rage. I had to see it with my own eyes. Before I could stop myself, I was out the door, marching down the hallway. Each step was heavier than the last. The sound of my bare feet slapping against the cold tiles drowned out by the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't care who heard or what anyone thought. All I knew was that I had to confront this betrayal. When I reached the door next to ours, my hand hovered over it for a second. A flicker of doubt passed through me. Could this really be happening? Maybe it was just some horrible misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, anything but what my gut was telling me. But then I heard it again, Chloe's voice, gasping and moaning, unmistakable. I didn't knock. I pounded on the door, my fist colliding with the wood in a way that felt almost satisfying. "Chloe!" I shouted, my voice rough, barely able to hold back the rage bubbling beneath the surface. No answer. My mind spun. I couldn't take it. I kicked the door, hard. The frame shook, and before I knew it, the door flew open with a loud crack. What I saw made my stomach drop. There she was, Chloe, my Chloe, wrapped in the sheets with some guy I had never seen before. Both of them looked like deer caught in headlights, their faces pale, eyes wide with shock. For a second, the room was still, like a frozen scene in a movie. Time seemed to stop, and everything felt surreal, almost like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Chloe scrambled to cover herself, stammering, "Alan, wait. It's not." But her words were empty, her voice shaky and desperate, and it only made me angrier. A mistake? You're calling this a mistake? I growled, cutting her off as I stood there, the fury rising inside me. My hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. You think I'm blind? Or just stupid? The guy, who had been silent up until that point, sat up, trying to gather his clothes. Man, listen, I didn't know, he started, but I wasn't in the mood for excuses. Shut up, I snapped, my voice cold and laced with venom. I glared at him, the anger boiling over, but I didn't care to hear his side of the story. He was nothing to me, just a face in the wrong place at the wrong time. Chloe tried again, her voice shaking, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I was drunk. I didn't know. I thought it was you. Alan, I swear, I thought I was coming back to our room. I stared at her, my mind struggling to wrap around what she was saying. Drunk? Confused? How could she possibly mix something like this up? You seriously expect me to believe that? I asked, my voice breaking a little as I spoke. The betrayal was sinking deeper, the realization that this wasn't just some dream I could wake up from. This was real. Her tears started flowing, and she grabbed at the sheets, pulling them tighter around her, as if they could protect her from the truth that had already come crashing down on both of us. Please, Alan, I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just confused. But nothing she said could fix what I was seeing. No amount of tears could glue back together the trust she had shattered. I stood there, staring at Chloe, my mind barely able to process the words coming out of her mouth. Confused? You thought it was me? I repeated, incredulous. It was like I didn't even know who she was anymore. We had been together for years, shared everything, our hopes, our dreams, our life together, and now, here she was, feeding me a lie that was so absurd, it almost felt like an insult. She started to sob, real tears now, her voice shaky as she pleaded with me. Please, Alan, you have to believe me. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. I thought I was coming back to our room. I didn't even realize until it was too late. Her words were bouncing off me, failing to sink in. Drunk or not, how could she not know? The truth of what had happened hung in the air between us, undeniable. It was like the room had shrunk, and all I could hear was the sound of her crying, and my own breathing, heavy with anger and hurt. The stranger in my bed, with my girlfriend, sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed, his shirt half on, glancing at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't have the guts. I couldn't even look at him. He was nobody to me. All I could focus on was Chloe, and the way she kept pleading, trying to explain the unexplainable. I didn't mean for this to happen, she repeated, her voice breaking. I shook my head, backing away from her, from the room, from everything I thought I knew about us. You didn't mean for this to happen? I said, my voice low, almost shaking. But it did. It did happen, Chloe. You did this. You made this choice. She tried to move closer, reaching out for me, her hand trembling. I love you, Alan. Please, you have to believe me. It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I stepped back, putting distance between us. I couldn't bear to let her touch me. I didn't want her anywhere near me. A mistake? I spat, the anger now overtaking the pain. No, Chloe. A mistake is spilling a drink. This was a choice. You made it, and you can't undo it. She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands, her sobs muffled against the sheets she had just shared with someone else. The sound of her crying filled the room, but I felt nothing but numbness. It was like the part of me that had cared, that had loved her so deeply, had been ripped out, leaving behind only a hollow space. I don't care if you were drunk, I said, my voice calm now, the fury ebbing into something colder. You didn't just fall into bed with him by accident. You knew exactly what you were doing. Her sobbing grew louder, but I couldn't feel sympathy anymore. I was done with this, done with her excuses, her tears, her pathetic attempts to make this seem like something that just happened. No, she had destroyed us, and nothing could change that now. I turned and walked out of the room, each step feeling heavier than the last. My mind was racing, but my heart felt dead. like something had been broken inside me that could never be fixed. The moment I stepped back into our hotel room, I knew I couldn't stay here, not with her, not after what I'd just seen. I grabbed my suitcase, threw in a few clothes, and zipped it up. There was no going back. Not now. The life we had? It was over. As I stood in the middle of our hotel room, staring at the half-packed suitcase on the bed, reality finally set in. This was at the end of everything. My heart was still racing, but it wasn't from anger anymore. It was from something else, something deeper. The realization that I had lost Chloe, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. And it wasn't even the betrayal that hurt the most, it was the lies, the excuses, the pitiful attempt to make it seem like it wasn't her fault. I didn't even want to look at her again. Just the thought of seeing her face, her tear-filled eyes, filled me with a sickening feeling I couldn't shake. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and checked the time. It was past midnight. It didn't matter. I had to leave. Staying here, in this room, in this resort, felt like a slow suffocation. I had just zipped up my suitcase when I heard the door to the room next door creak open. Chloe. She had followed me, her footsteps soft but hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether to come in or stay back. I could feel her presence behind me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see her. "Alan, please," she said quietly, her voice thick with tears. "Don't leave. We can talk about this. We can fix it. I love you." That word love felt like poison in my ears. How could she say that? How could she stand there, after what I'd just seen, and tell me she loved me? I closed my eyes, my grip tightening around the handle of the suitcase. "I don't want to talk, Chloe," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "There's nothing left to talk about." She stepped closer, her hand gently touching my arm, and I recoiled from her touch like it burned. "Alan, please. I'm begging you. It was a mistake. I know it was horrible. I know I hurt you, but I didn't mean for this to happen. It didn't mean anything. It's you I love." I turned to face her then, and the sight of her broke something inside me. Her face was red, tear-streaked, her eyes wide with desperation. It was a face I used to know so well, one I had once loved so deeply. But now, all I could see was betrayal. She reached for me again, but I took a step back, shaking my head. "You keep saying that," I said, my voice trembling, "that it didn't mean anything, that you didn't mean for this to happen. But, Chloe, it did happen. You let it happen. You could have stopped at any point, but you didn't." Her sobs grew louder, and she fell to her knees in front of me, clutching the hem of my shirt as if she could pull me back into her world, the world we had before this nightmare. "I'll do anything, Alan. Anything. Just, please don't leave me. We can fix this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I swear." I looked down at her, feeling a mix of pity and disgust. How had we gotten here? How had everything unraveled so fast? Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe, just maybe, this could be fixed. But the truth? The truth was staring me in the face, clear as day. "Even if I wanted to forgive you," I said slowly, my voice hollow, "I can't forget what I saw. I'll never be able to forget it. I can't unsee you with him. And no matter what you say, no matter how much you cry, that's never going away." Chloe's hands dropped from my shirt, her body shaking with sobs. She knew it too. There was no coming back from this. I grabbed my suitcase and turned for the door, my mind made up. "Goodbye, Chloe," I said quietly, not looking back as I walked out of the room. I heard her cry out behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I walked down the hallway, through the lobby, and out into the night air, the cool breeze hitting my face like a slap. It was over. I was free, but the weight of it crushed me all the same. The night air hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the cold, but the realization of what I had just done, what I was walking away from. Chloe was behind me, sobbing, desperate to pull me back, but none of it mattered anymore. I dragged my suitcase through the lobby, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The resort staff glanced up as I passed, probably wondering why someone was leaving in the middle of the night. But I didn't care. I needed to get away. Far away. The taxi stand was just outside the resort entrance. I hadn't planned any of this. No idea where I was going or what I'd do next, but anything felt better than staying. I pulled out my phone and searched for flights, my fingers shaky as they tapped at the screen. The next flight home wasn't until morning, which meant I had hours to kill, hours to stew in my own thoughts. I dropped onto a nearby bench, staring out at the darkened beach. The waves crashed softly in the distance, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but every time I did, the images came rushing back, the sounds, the sights, the reality of it all. Chloe, with him, the betrayal, the hurt. I'd been blindsided. How had I missed the signs? Had I been so focused on reviving what we had lost that I ignored what was right in front of me? Or was she just that good at hiding it? I had no idea. And now, sitting there, alone in the middle of the night, I started to doubt everything. Maybe it hadn't started with this guy. Maybe there had been others. I couldn't be sure, but the thought gnawed at me, making me feel sick. As the minutes ticked by, I felt a wave of exhaustion roll over me. But it wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Everything I had once known, everything I had trusted, was crumbling. I had spent years building a life with Chloe, and in a single night, it had all been shattered beyond repair. The truth was, we'd been drifting for months, hadn't we? Life had gotten in the way, work had taken over, and we had become more like roommates than lovers. The vacation was supposed to be our chance to reconnect, to fix what had broken between us. But instead of reigniting our spark, it had burned us both to the ground. A cab pulled up to the curb, and I watched as a couple stumbled out, laughing and holding each other close, clearly enjoying the end of their night. It hit me then, how different my night had turned out. Just hours ago, Chloe and I had been the ones laughing, dancing, feeling alive. And now I was alone, facing the reality that what we had was over. The cab driver noticed me sitting there, looking like I'd been through hell. He nodded toward the car. "You need a ride, man?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly, getting up and grabbing my suitcase. "Take me to the airport." The driver helped load my bag into the trunk, and I climbed into the back seat, sinking into the worn leather. As we pulled away from the resort, I glanced back, half expecting to see Chloe standing there, watching me go. But she wasn't. There was no dramatic farewell, no final words. Just an empty resort in the rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. The car ride was silent, aside from the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the driver's radio. I leaned my head against the window, staring out into the darkness, watching the coastline fade into the horizon. The cab's headlights illuminated the winding road, but beyond that, it was pitch black. Fitting, really. The future felt just as uncertain, just as dark. I couldn't stop my mind from replaying every moment, every detail. Chloe's face, her excuses, the stranger in our bed. It all kept looping, over and over again. I wondered what she was doing now. Was she still crying? Was she blaming herself? Or had she already started telling herself another version of the story where it wasn't her fault? I didn't know. I didn't care. I just wanted it all to stop. As we approached the airport, the driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Tough night, huh?" he asked, breaking the silence again. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You have no idea." We pulled up to the terminal, and I paid the fare, grabbing my suitcase from the trunk. I thanked the driver and walked into the airport, the bright fluorescent lights hitting me like a slap. Everything felt too loud, too bright, too real. The world was moving on, indifferent to the wreckage of my life. I found a quiet corner near the check-in desks and sat down, pulling my suitcase close. There were still a few hours before the first flight out. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to quiet my mind. But the weight of the betrayal sat heavy on my chest, and I knew that no matter how far I ran, it would follow me. There was no escape. Sitting in the airport, surrounded by travelers coming and going, I felt like I was stuck in limbo, physically here but mentally 1,000 miles away, replaying the events over and over again. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, the hum of voices and the sound of rolling suitcases blending into the background, but I barely noticed. My mind was back at that hotel, stuck in that moment when my world came crashing down. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen, contemplating whether I should text someone. Maybe a friend. Maybe just someone. But what could I say? Hey, guess what? My girlfriend cheated on me. It felt ridiculous. Everyone around me was going on with their lives, and mine had just been flipped upside down. I scrolled through old photos of Chloe and me, pictures from better times, vacations, birthdays, random nights out. We looked happy. We were happy. I thought we were, anyway. I stopped at one of us at a friend's wedding last year. We were laughing, her head resting on my shoulder, my arm wrapped around her waist. In that moment, it felt like we had the whole world ahead of us. Now, all I saw were cracks I hadn't noticed before, the distance that had grown between us. I couldn't help but wonder when things had started to fall apart. Was it months ago? A year ago? Had she been drifting away from me long before this trip? And worse, had I just been too blind to see it? There had been signs, subtle ones. The way she'd come home later than usual some nights, always claiming she had to stay late at work. The way her phone had become an extension of her hand, notifications lighting up the screen more often than I remembered. But I never questioned it. I trusted her. I thought I knew her. My stomach churned with the thought. Maybe this hadn't been the first time. Maybe it had started long before that night at the resort, with some other guy. The thought made me feel sick, and I had to close my eyes, willing the images away. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the memories, the shared moments that were now tainted by this revelation. How could I look back at any part of our relationship and not wonder if it had all been a lie? I didn't know how to separate the good from the bad anymore. Everything felt tainted, like our whole relationship had been a slow unraveling, and I was the last to notice. I must have sat there for hours, lost in my thoughts. At some point, the first signs of dawn began to filter through the airport windows, casting a soft, gray light across the floor. The world outside was waking up, but I felt numb, exhausted. I hadn't slept, but the idea of closing my eyes, of seeing her face in my dreams, was unbearable. I glanced at the departure board. My flight was boarding soon. I stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and made my way to the gate, feeling like I was sleepwalking through the motions. As I walked, I felt the weight of what I was leaving behind, not just the vacation or Chloe, but the future I had imagined for us. The plans we had made together, the life we had started to build. I handed my boarding pass to the agent and walked down the jet bridge, the cold metal walls pressing in on me as I got closer to the plane. I found my seat, shoved my bag into the overhead bin, and sat down, staring out the window as the last few passengers filed in. The flight was barely half full, and for that, I was grateful. The last thing I wanted was small talk with a stranger. The engines roared to life, and the plane started to taxi down the runway, the rumble beneath my feet oddly soothing. As the plane lifted off, the world below became smaller, and I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was leaving more than just a city behind. As we climbed higher into the sky, I realized that part of me was still waiting for a text from Chloe, some last-ditch effort to win me back, to explain everything away. But my phone remained silent, and in that silence, I found a small measure of clarity. There was no going back. Not this time. Even if she had texted, even if she had called, it wouldn't have changed anything. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. The plane leveled out, and I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. The tears that had been threatening to spill over finally did. Silent, steady, and unstoppable. The weight of everything I'd held in, all the hurt, the anger, the disbelief, it all came crashing down in the quiet of that airplane cabin 30,000 feet above the ground. I let it come. For the first time since I'd walked out of that hotel room, I let myself feel it all. As the plane began its descent, I wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. The storm of emotions had finally passed, leaving me hollow but strangely calm. The world below was coming back into focus, the cityscape stretching out beneath the clouds. It was home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Everything had changed. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, and the passengers around me stirred, preparing for the rush to disembark. I stayed seated, taking my time, letting everyone else leave before I stood up. I wasn't in a hurry. There was no one waiting for me. No one to meet me at baggage claim or ask how the trip went. As I stepped off the plane and made my way through the airport, the reality of my new life began to sink in. There was no Chloe waiting at home, no shared apartment to return to, no future together. I was on my own now, and while that thought had once terrified me, now it felt different. There was a strange freedom in it, like I was walking into the unknown with nothing to hold me back. I grabbed my suitcase and headed outside. The crisp morning air hit my face, and I stood there for a moment, taking it in. Everything felt raw, like a fresh wound, but I wasn't suffocating under the weight of it anymore. The pain was still there, yes, but there was something else, too, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could start over. I pulled out my phone, the notifications lighting up the screen. A few messages from friends, asking about the trip, checking in on me. But still nothing from Chloe. I scrolled through her name in my contacts, my thumb hovering over it for a second before I made the decision that had been brewing since I left the resort. I deleted her number. It was harder than I thought it would be, like cutting away a part of my past that I had once clung to so tightly. But it was necessary. Holding on to her, onto the pain, was only going to drag me down. And I couldn't let that happen. Not anymore. I called a cab and stood there, waiting as the sun began to rise higher in the sky, casting a golden hue over everything. It was almost ironic how beautiful the morning was after the wreckage of the past few days. But that's life, isn't it? Always moving forward, even when you feel like you're standing still. The cab pulled up, and I got in, giving the driver my address. As we drove through the city streets, everything felt different. I wasn't the same person who had left for that vacation. I wasn't the same person who had believed in Chloe, who had trusted her with everything. That part of me was gone, left behind on the beach with the memories of what could have been. But maybe that was okay. The cab dropped me off at my apartment, and I stood outside the door for a moment, the key heavy in my hand. This place, once filled with the promise of a future with Chloe, was now just mine. I would have to rebuild, piece by piece, but I knew that I could. As I opened the door and stepped inside, I felt the weight of the past start to lift. It wasn't gone completely, not yet, but it was lighter, manageable. I knew the next few weeks would be hard. There would be more moments of anger, of sadness, of doubt. But I also knew that I was strong enough to face them. I dropped my suitcase by the door and looked around. The apartment was quiet, still. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for me to decide what came next. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't scared of the future. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city below, and I took a deep breath. The air felt different, lighter, fresher, filled with possibility. Maybe it was too soon to think about what was next, but I knew that whatever it would be on my terms. I wasn't going to let this break me, because Chloe had made her choice, and I had made mine. And my choice was to keep moving forward. Discover more stories. Subscribe today.